Recently, I went through a series of interviews for a role as a Python engineer. In total, there were 4 interviews that I had to go through, and the whole process happened very fast. From the time that I submitted my application to the time that I received an offer, it was less than a month. My strategy for applying for jobs at this time involved putting in the least amount of effort to the job search as possible. And the reason for that is because I was already doing some contract work for a company that expressed interest in hiring me full time, if not now, then in the very near future. So I felt like I didn't really absolutely need to get a job right now. But after communicating with this company that I was doing contract work with, I also decided to see what other opportunities could be available and were out there. So my approach to applying for these other opportunities was mainly through LinkedIn. I put together my resume, which by no means was perfect, but it was good enough. And I put zero time into preparing for any technical coding interviews because I kind of wanted to find jobs that would either allow me to work on some like side project, because I feel very confident with my ability to take a set of requirements for a project and execute on that project. So I was hoping to find jobs that would have more of that style of interviewing process, or a job position that would interview and talk more about my actual skills and the things that I would be doing and the things that I have done in the past. So of course it's really difficult to filter out for these opportunities because job postings don't usually say what exactly their hiring process is like. So instead, what I did for finding jobs that I would apply to is that I looked for jobs that I kind of knew would be worth the time and energy, because it takes time and energy to apply for jobs. Some jobs would ask really specific questions along with their job application process. Like they would ask you, why are you interested in this position? And you have to write a little bit about that, which I guess, you could see as the cover letter, but then also some companies would require a cover letter on top of these questions. So I was very lazy in my process, and I decided that I really only wanted to write a detailed cover letter or any detailed information if I had a significant reason to believe that this was a good opportunity. So I didn't just apply to random companies because I thought that it would be cool to work at them, like Google or Amazon. I really have no tie to any of these companies, and at this stage in my life, it just didn't really make a lot of sense to put in the time and energy to preparing for the job interviews and to making my resume look absolutely perfect and writing the best cover letter. I was very lazy. So I knew one company that I really liked, and I had been in contact with the CEO of this company in the past. I had tried applying for a job in this company, and they have recently expanded out the number of roles that they had in the company. So I put a lot of time into directly trying to get this job. I communicated directly with the CEO. I communicated directly with the hiring manager because the CEO told me who was doing the hiring. So I communicated directly with the hiring manager. And I put a good amount of time and energy into preparing my resume and anything I wrote that it was very specifically tailored for this company. I would have loved to have worked for this company. I did get an interview with that company, but that didn't really go anywhere. And another approach that I had was that I would go on LinkedIn and I would apply to positions that I felt like were suited towards my skill level, towards my interest, and that would have the easy apply button from LinkedIn. So LinkedIn has this like easy apply button. You can hit it and then it just takes you through these forms that you have to fill out. And a lot of times it's just completely automated because if you've already uploaded your resume, then it's already in there. And then it'll ask you like how many years of Python do you have? And it's just like little click buttons. But sometimes there are longer questions that you have to answer with these, and I would just ignore those. So in total, I applied to less than 10 companies, and one of these companies got back to me almost immediately. This was for a Python engineering position, and from the description, it seemed like it could be a good fit. It was like doing Python engineering software and data engineering, and I really like that. It's something that I'm very interested in working on. I'm obsessed with working with data and Python. But one of the things that was kind of a drawback from this company was that it didn't really seem like it had much to do with machine learning, and my interest is in doing data engineering for machine learning applications. But I was still open to this because it is my first software engineering full-time role. The recruiter got back to me almost immediately, and he set up a first interview with him, and this interview was scheduled to be 45 minutes long. In this interview, the recruiter was very good. He was extremely professional, and he knew his stuff too. So he just went through the job position and all the specific skills that were going to be required for this job position. It was kind of overwhelming, like the pace at which he was just dropping all this technology and all these terms. But I was able to take in as much as I could. And then he asked me to explain the things that I have done and the technologies that I have worked with. And I went through all of the things that I have done. And there was quite a bit of overlap between the skills of the job and the things that I have done. So both the recruiter and I recognized that this seems like it could be a really good fit. And he moved me on to the first technical interview, the second interview in total. And he kind of gave me a heads up that this technical interview was not going to be traditional algorithm type interview. Instead, they're going to focus more on my Python skills. So in this first interview, the interviewer was going over the things that he did in his job, and he did like a very specific part of the overall system. He worked on a very specific part. So this interview process was about specific things related to Python. At first, he was kind of gauging how well I knew Python. So he would ask me, like, what's one thing that you really like about the Python programming language, and what's one thing you don't really like about it? And then that led into a good conversation. The other questions that this interviewer asked me were related to actually coding. So I pulled up a text editor, and he asked me about decorators. Or no, generators were the first one. So he asked me about Python generators. Show me how a Python generator works. So I wrote a quick Python generator. I was able to write up a generator, so that was no problem. And then the next part was about decorators. So I wrote up a decorator, and we had some discussion then about, after each of these, about like generators and what exactly they're doing, why they're beneficial. And then we also talked about decorators and what they're actually doing under the hood. So these were both interesting problems. So that was it for this interview. I passed this interview, and the recruiter again immediately got back to me because he was very good at his job, and he told me that I did very well, and he was going to schedule me with a second technical interview. So this would be now the third interview in the process. He gave me a heads up this time that there would be some coding problems, so be ready to code during this interview. And again, this interview was scheduled to be 45 minutes long. So I went into this third interview, and it was very similar to the second technical interview in the beginning, where he was just explaining to me what he did on a day-to-day basis, and he asked me about my background, my experience, and then we got into the coding portion of the interview. We only did small talk for like 10 minutes as opposed to in the other interviews like 20 to 25 minutes, and we got almost right away into the technical part of it, and he asked me algorithm type questions that I could solve with Python. The first one was an algorithm working with text-based data. And this one was write a function that takes in a string of any length and a size. Okay, so it can take in like an integer value. And then you have to write a program that goes through and finds all of the sequences of the size that were passed in. And if there are repeats of that same sequence, then keep a counter of that. So keep track of all the unique sequences and the number of times that those unique sequences occur within the overall string. And the sequence has to be the length that is passed into the function. Even though I didn't practice specific algorithm type questions, anything related to text-based data in Python, I am very proficient in. I feel very good about that, and I love the challenge too. Like I heard that challenge and I was like, yes, I know how to solve this. Let's go. So I started writing up this program, and it was interesting because I kind of expected the interviewer to want to see everything that I was doing and understand like how I was thinking about the problem, but no, he really didn't want to. He just wanted me to come up with a solution and then explain the solution to him. So I just shared my screen anyways while I was writing it up, and I was explaining to him what I was doing. And the first thing that I did was just really try to understand the requirements of what he was asking me for, because his explanation of the problem was not the same one that I just gave. It was slightly different, and I needed to better understand exactly what he wanted, because I wanted to write a function that only took in the things that he was asking for and only returned the things that he was asking for. I didn't want to just write some function that I thought did what he was asking for. It was a very simple problem for me to figure out, and I finished it in like 5 minutes. I finished it very fast. And then he really didn't know what else to do, so he had to think of another problem. And the next problem was one that I did not study for, and I knew was kind of like a hang up of mine. It was more challenging for me to figure out. The question was given a tree structure to figure out the depth of the tree. This is an extremely simple problem to solve if you know the solution. If you need to think of the solution from scratch and you don't know how to think in the way that is required to solve the problem, then it is very difficult. So I didn't know how to solve this problem, and I was looking at the problem from a top-down perspective, whereas you should think of it from a bottom-up perspective. You should think of it in a recursive way. So I started to realize that there was a recursive solution to this problem, and I was trying to figure out exactly how to come up with the solution, and I was able to kind of like drive at the solution enough and get the help from the interviewer to ultimately come up with a correct solution. After we had come up with a solution, it was still a little confusing to me exactly how it worked. So as soon as I got off the interview, I was feeling like so upset, because I knew that if I had just practiced a little bit, that I could have nailed that question, and I could have just ensured the possibility that I would get this job. So I immediately started rewriting the solution on my own until I fully understood it. And now I will never forget how to write that solution, because I just ingrained it into my brain after that, because it felt so uncomfortable that I couldn't answer that question in the interview. After a couple of days, I still hadn't heard back from the recruiter, but then he emailed me and said that it was taking a while for him to get feedback from the engineer, and he was wondering how things went from my side. And I was very honest with him that I felt like the beginning of the interview went really well. I'm interested in the work. I nailed the first interview question, but the second one I kind of struggled with. So I'm not really sure how it went overall. And then the recruiter finally responded back to that email and said, hey, don't worry about it. I just talked to the engineer. He said you did great. He said that you're an experienced programmer and everything. So I want to set you up with the final interview with the hiring manager. The hiring manager is the lead of this engineering team. And again, this was going to be a technical interview. The recruiter told me that there would be more questions about like system design. Given that these were my first set of technical interviews, I had no idea what to expect for this interview that might involve system design. I'd figured out enough from the first two interviews about their systems that I was anticipating some of the questions that could be asked. Like I was thinking that they might ask really specific questions to make sure that I was a good fit for the role, and not just like general questions, because that was kind of like what I was getting from this company, is that even though the second interview was more like traditional algorithm, my feeling was that overall they wanted to make sure that you knew how to work in their systems. So I knew that they worked with Kubernetes and Docker. And although I've worked with these technologies in the past, there are some hangups that I have about how things work. So I went through like 4 hours of tutorials and I wrote down a bunch of notes, and I kind of just like studied Docker and Kubernetes to make sure that I could answer like system level questions and design questions about these types of systems. And I also just saw it as like a good opportunity to kind of like study with some fire under me, right? Because like that's the best time to really study, is when you have a deadline. You can like push yourself to learn something new. So I just took advantage of that opportunity. When it came to doing the actual interview, the first part of the interview was by far the best. This hiring manager, the manager of this team, was a very intelligent guy, and he knew the systems from the big picture perspective, which is what I'm interested in. He knew about how it related to the business as well, which again is something that I'm very interested in. I like to think about how software is related to a business and how the software is ultimately driving the value that the business is creating. This hiring manager was able to talk about those things with me, and we had good conversation. We had good rapport during this first part of the interview. That went on for about 30 minutes, and I was kind of thinking that maybe that was going to be it. Maybe we were just going to like have great conversations about the work that we were going to be doing together, and we were going to ride off into the sunset. And then he dropped it on me. Okay, now we're going to do a system design question. I want you to design a URL shortener. Again, I did not study at all for any of these things, but I've seen these type of questions around on the internet. You know, they pop up on my YouTube recommendations. Design Twitter, design a URL shortener, design Google Docs. Like there are a bunch of videos about these things. And whenever I see these videos, I always think, how would I design that system? And I start kind of thinking about how I would design that system. And I've always felt like if I really wanted to sit down and think about designing one of these systems, then I probably could. But when it came to design this URL shortener, although I didn't have a canned answer memorized, I felt like I could work through it and come up with the correct solution. And that's exactly what I was able to do. We kind of ran short on time, but I was able to come up with a good enough solution. And there was a time where he was kind of feeling like I was going off a little bit. He was like, I don't know if what you're saying is really right. But then I kind of like explained why I was thinking it that way. And then he was like, oh yeah, that's actually right. Yeah, you're right with how you were thinking about that. And that helped a lot. So my takeaway from this was that you should ask questions and you should kind of get the engineer to help you. And I had seen enough posts out there by hiring managers that that's what you should do. In fact, I saw on LinkedIn like just a week before this interview, the summary of this post on LinkedIn from this hiring manager from a big company was that as a technical interviewee, you should explain your thinking. You should talk through what it is you're trying to do so that the interviewer can help you, point you in the right direction. That's what I did with this manager, where I was like talking through everything that I was doing. At times I got too into the details and I didn't explain big picture what I was trying to do. So I feel like you should kind of explain like big picture, here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Then make sure, yes, okay, that's you're on the right page with that. Then say, all right, now I'm going to describe this part of the system, how this part of the system is going to work. And then they have some understanding of what it is you're trying to describe. Then you can go into the details of how you're going to accomplish each of the requirements for that part of the system. This interview went very well and we completed the interview. It was right around the time of the holidays. It felt like right in the middle of the holidays, like Christmas, New Year's. But the recruiter got back to me and told me that I did very well in this last interview and he wanted to make me an offer. He made me the offer for the highest amount of compensation that we had originally discussed when I was first hiring. He kind of gave me like a range of compensation and he said that this is on the upper end and like we have a hard ceiling with this amount. So I was able to get that upper amount and he extended an unofficial offer, which I had accepted mainly because he told me that it was in my best interest to do so. Like if you just accept this offer now, then I can go through the approval process and I can get you the official offer within a couple of weeks and then you can make up your mind then. So I unofficially accepted at that time. And then it did take him a couple of weeks because of the holidays to get that official offer, but I eventually got the official offer. And what I did next is something that I'm going to save for another video and another time because I'm still in the process of kind of making my final decisions on what exactly I'm going to do next in my career. But I just wanted to talk through this interview experience for a Python engineering role, what it was like. This was the first time I'd ever gone through anything like this. Fortunately for me, it was successful and I was able to get an offer in the end. Hope you enjoyed this content. If you did, be sure to subscribe to the channel and I will see you next time.